Welcome to Sports Beat KC, the Kansas City Stars sports podcast and YouTube program. We're talking Chiefs with columnist Sam McDowell and Vahe Gregorian and beat writer Jesse Newell. Guys, the Chiefs come off a 28-18 victory at the San Francisco 49ers. One of the more impressive outcomes of the season for the Chiefs, and it happened when their quarterback played his worst statistical game of the year. So how does this happen? How do the Chiefs have an impressive victory with Patrick Mahomes having his lowest passer rating of the season, no touchdowns, 2 picks, all the things that go into a passer rating? What, Vahe, started off, how can the Chiefs win as impressively as they had with Mahomes playing in some ways as unimpressively as he did?
Yeah, there's a lot going on this point, Blair. And so Patrick Mahomes is the NFL interception leader right now, tied for it, unless somebody eclipsed him last night. Worst quarterback rating of his career, 44.1, and more interceptions than touchdown passes, 8-6 this season. But you wouldn't say his imprint wasn't on this game. I mean, there's about 10 reasons why they win any game, right? And Patrick was certainly a key part of it, but with his legs and with his fire more than with his arm. And we've got to acknowledge the increasingly depleted receiver core, and that despite that, they scored more points than they've scored in this entire 12-game winning streak, 28. So Sam got into this a little bit in his column about how it's not just Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce's Chiefs anymore. And you can look across the board at how they won this game. You've got the defense with 3 interceptions. They had 2 all season before that. They were all key interceptions, 2 that led to touchdowns, 1 that prevented one, 2 from rookies. It's just kind of, a fascinating aspect of this. Noah Gray, big contribution on offense. Kareem Hunt running. They had the ability to move the ball on the ground in ways that are becoming increasingly apparent that they can do, even when they're down Pacheco. So it's all of that. It's the array of things that they're able to do. And again, you cannot minimize what Patrick did with responding to being literally punched in the throat and being stronger for it.
Yeah, Sam, it's almost like you almost need to measure success differently with the Chiefs than you do with other teams, because it's not going to be a 130 passer rating game from Mahomes. It's more unlikely than likely that we're going to get 12 receptions for 115 yards from Travis Kelce, or even a Chris Jones 2 sack game, which we've had 1 of this year, and yet all 3 of those guys still have a major imprint on a game, even if their numbers say they don't.
Yeah, but to me, it is about those other guys. I mean, the 3 biggest plays of this game against the 49ers in terms of win probability were a play that involved an interception from Christian Roland Wallace, who had played 1 defensive snap all year, interception from Jaden Hicks, who had played 13 defensive snaps all year, and then the punt return from McCole Hardman. And so the last Chiefs win we're talking about almost 300 yards of offense from 5 guys who were basically picked up off the street by the Chiefs, guys who other teams had cut and let go over the previous 12 months. And then this game, we're talking about guys the Chiefs weren't even using over the first 5 weeks of the season. I mean, they're getting contributions from, who would have gone into this game saying, okay, Blair, you do the players to watch every week. I don't think we had Roland Wallace on the list. I don't think we had Jaden Hicks on the list. I don't think we had McCole Hardman on that list. And I don't know if the week before you would have had the guys on the list that contributed to that win against the Saints. So it really speaks to, I think, first of all, the foundation that the coaches have set, but the preparation that these guys have. And a lot of this just comes back to one guy to me, which is Steve Spagnuolo. He's put guys in a position to succeed, and they're players that they haven't had success at this level. I mean, you're asking, like, Jaden Hicks was in the game because of Justin Reed was dealing with his hand injury for a couple of snaps, but he went into the game planning to play Roland Wallace, and to have a guy, an undrafted rookie, who has played one defensive snap all year, and you decide, hey, let's throw him in San Francisco, one of the most complex offenses in the league, would be a good time to introduce him to the rest of the NFL. Like I said, I think it's a real credit to their defensive coaches, their secondary coach, Dave Merritt, and Steve Spagnuolo specifically.
I want to credit Sam McDowell because, listen, guys, we're around the team. We're around them in training camp. We all do roster projections, and I guarantee you nobody on God's green earth had Chris Roland Wallace as a 53-man roster guy on roster projections. Yeah. Sam walked right up to Chris Roland Wallace. I'm calling him Chris because I think we call him Chris. He's been called Christian other times. He walked right up to him and started interviewing him in the locker room, and I'm not sure I would have known what he looked like. If Chris Roland Wallace came up to me and said hi, I would have said hi and tried to look at his number real quick because I'm not sure I would have recognized him. That's the kind of guys that are making game-winning plays for the Chiefs. And I thought something that was interesting from the locker room that Brian Cook said. I was asking about all these guys, about Jaden Hicks, about Chris Roland Wallace. And I think this does speak to what Sam's point of Spagnuolo and Reed and the coaching staff, but also the culture that they've created inside the locker room. Brian Cook said, look, those guys, they don't hold their breath when Chris Roland Wallace comes in. They just expect him to perform. They expect him to he even used the term like nobody's holding their breath when he comes on the field. I think there's something to that because you've seen all these other teams. I mean, there's a million other teams out there, or at least 10 or so in the NFL, that make excuses that say, hey, this receiver's down, or hey, you're the Jets. This quarterback can only play with these receivers. He needs this one in here, for it all to work. The Chiefs don't make those excuses. They just
49ers, the 49ers made those excuses after the game.
Everybody's talking about, they lost their 3 top receivers. What were the Chiefs playing with, right? Like they lost 3 of their top 4 receivers. So it is just very interesting. The way that the Chiefs handle adversity, I think, is different than other teams. And Justin Reed spoke to it after the game. He said that those guys all get together. They try to help each other out. There's sort of this thing in the locker room, which is like, we are all in it together to help everyone out so that when their time comes, we trust them and we believe in them and we think they're going to succeed. Brian Cook was saying after the game, he's like, hey, Chris Roland Wallace has been great. We've seen what he does in practice. We know how hard he works. And because of that, when he steps in there, we're ready for him and we believe he's going to succeed. And I just think the Chiefs have this sort of system, or in your case, Sam, if you want to talk about formula, in place right now where the pieces don't matter as much as the foundation that's been built. And so that's a huge credit to Andy Reid, Steve Spagnuolo, Brett Veach, whoever you want to talk about, that these things that are all happening to the Chiefs has not impacted them like it's impacted so many other NFL teams out there. And these guys that you would not expect to make plays are making plays for the Chiefs when they might not for other teams.
The one thing I would add to it is that this used to affect the Chiefs a lot. I mean, Blair, you mentioned that Patrick Mahomes had the worst quarterback rating of his career. He's had 17 days where he had like under 80 quarterback rating coming into that day in San Francisco. The Chiefs went 8-9 in those games. This was not a formula that they used to be able to make work. Like they used to depend on Patrick Mahomes being Patrick Mahomes.
Just one other thing to add to this, we got, I think, kind of in the weeds with this a little bit late last season with how they were learning to play complementary football, in part because of necessity with the way the offense was going, and obviously because of the luxury of how good the defense was. And I think it's continued to be that, right? And that is one of those things that speaks to everything Jesse just said about the culture, about the next man up mentality, about understanding each side of the ball is obviously affecting how the other one goes, and whatever limitations they have on offense, they've been able to kind of contour it to a winning formula. So it does reflect sort of the three-headed monster, I think, in a lot of ways that they have, with how Veach works with Andy Reid and how Andy Reid works with Patrick Mahomes. And now there's no doubt that Steve Spagnuolo is, I think, maybe one of the most significant forces. I don't know who's more significant in all this right now than Steve Spagnuolo and his defenses.
But on the defensive side, for this to work, for a Chris Roland Wallace, and I had to look up his name just to make sure I got the Roland spelled correctly.
Sorry to interrupt, Blair, but after the game, Andy Reid kept calling him Roland, and I couldn't be positive he didn't think his name was just Roland Wallace.
Well,
I'm kidding, kind of.
I was joking on the way in there. We wondered how often Andy had spoken with him, or if he would have recognized him.
And with Jared Hicks, until that interception, the poor guy was going to be known for the up back who couldn't get a yard on on a fake punt. So,
well, and Blair, his name's Jaden, so just so he can be doubly disrespected on this podcast,
Right. Exactly. Sorry about that, Jaden.
You should claim you did that on purpose just to fit this theme.
Yes, so we're going with that.
Quite obvious. Yeah.
But it works on defense because of Trent McDuffie and Chris Jones and Leo Chanel, and you've got pieces around the seldom used players that we saw on Sunday. It reminded me a little bit of the Deion Bush interception in the end zone against the Ravens in the AFC Championship game. I think he only played 3 snaps in that game, and one of those was the pick. So we see that on defense occasionally with the Chiefs. On the offensive side, when your wide receiver rotation now is begins with Xavier Worthy and flows through Justin Watson and McCole Hardman and Sky Moore, I don't look. They did put up 28 points, which is the most they had in a game in quite a while. But is it sustainable to continue to go on like this with so many key players out? They found a replacement at running back for Isaiah Pacheco. I go back to wide receiver and wonder if they're going to make a move, if there's going to be a practice team call up. You're down to 4 guys, with Juju Smith-Schuster out. What's going to happen at wide receiver? Jesse.
I think they'll call up a practice squad guy. I think they'll continue to look at the trade market, and I think it's another next man up mentality. I think the reason it works, and I think obviously we can get stuck on receiver with this particular team because of the lack of options that they have. But this is not a game where, like in basketball, you have to have a point guard, on the floor at all times because you got to bring the ball up. Like the Chiefs have masked some of this by just not playing as many receivers. They'll play tight ends, and Jared Wiley can block. And as Sam wrote about, Travis Kelce is getting, kudos from teammates in the locker room from his blocking. And, they now also, the other thing that we have to talk about with them in particular is the run game and how they've completely transformed how they run offense. I looked it up, next gen stats. The Chiefs had 23 designed runs between the tackles against the 49ers, which is known as a good defensive team, the most they've had in a game since 2016. This is not a normal Chiefs offense. I mean, I think it was the most anyone has had this season, Jesse. I mean, this is not what we're used. Like, we talk about Mahomes and his numbers being down and not producing like he normally does. It's because normally, for a good reason, because the stats tell you should, the Chiefs throw the ball 2/3 of the time. You know what I mean? Like they rely on their pass game. Their pass game is what creates everything. That's not the case this year. Like they are just taking it downhill against teams, and they're gaining 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 yards. And we heard Matt Nagy talk about this last week when I asked him about his team's down and run game. He says it takes a lot of pressure off of your offensive line to pass block. It takes a lot of pressure off your quarterback, who really hasn't found his stride yet. So I totally agree with you, Blair. There's going to be a lot of focus on the receivers. I actually would be surprised if the Chiefs don't trade for a receiver at some point here, just because of the depth and how low it's gotten at this point. And whether that guy can come in and contribute right away probably remains to be seen. But I just think that the Chiefs, it's sort of like the defensive thing we talked about. I think that they feel like schematically and, sum is greater than the parts sort of way. I feel like they think that they can just kind of maneuver these things around. And because their run offense has been so successful, their interior guys have been so good at moving guys off the ball, this offense can succeed kind of in a different way than even a lot of other NFL teams, and definitely different than what Patrick Mahomes teams have done in the past.
Well, Noah Gray was certainly a big part of it on Sunday. Probably the best game of his career. He was Pro Football Focus top-rated player for the Chiefs on that day. Leo Chenal was second. How interesting. Leo Chenal had the big game against the 49ers in the Super Bowl, comes up big again. And speaking of players who come up big against the 49ers, what is it that gets into McCole Hardman when he sees that particular shade of red and gold of the San Francisco 49ers? He was just terrific again. I think the Chiefs, as we've seen in previous games, the regular season a couple of years ago and this past weekend, the Chiefs really take advantage of San Francisco's aggressiveness on defense. And McCole Hardman and Xavier Worthy had an end around as well. So, hats off to the Chiefs staff for recognize it. And what in the world is Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers staff doing, not recognizing that that's how the Chiefs have attacked them previously and got to them again this year?
A key point in the McCole formula is McCole being McCole, as Sam divined from talking to him after the game, where he divulged that he was supposed to fair catch the 55-yard punt return. So McCole just letting it fly. But Blair, you had an interview with McCole one-on-one last week that proved not only to be a good review of what had happened, but a good preview of what had happened, what would happen.
Can we expand that to just actually pat our coverage on the back for last week? We talked to McCole. We gave readers the McCole Hardman preview. He has a touchdown and has the longest punt return the Chiefs have had in 4 years. Jesse wrote everything he just mentioned about running inside the tackles. He wrote that during the week. I had delved into their red zone issues being kind of a fluke. They score on 4 out of their 5 trips to the red zone. The only one they did not score was when they get to the 19-yard line and get sacked on first down. A lot of this stuff for this game, I know seems surprising to people that maybe haven't followed week to week for the Chiefs. But those of us that have, this game fits right into the puzzle that the Chiefs have been building all year long. I mean, when you talk about their wide receivers, Blair, I mean, to underscore what Jesse said, they're not replacing like for like at wide receivers. Instead, they're just choosing other avenues. Their 13 personnel is at 11% this year. Last year was at 6.5 or 7. They're running on first down at 57% of the time. They have never run more than they've passed it on first down under Patrick Mahomes. Their formula is not, hey, let's find somebody to replace Rashee Rice. Okay, Juju Smith-Schuster's out. Let's find somebody to replace him. We don't have that guy. Let's do something different now.
A year ago, not a year ago, but Christmas Day a year ago, the Chiefs were a 10.5-point favorite against the Las Vegas Raiders. And I had to go back and look that up to see how big a fit, because they were 9.5-point favorites on the opening line for this week's game when they go out to Vegas. That game on Christmas Day a year ago was in Kansas City and was maybe the worst game the Chiefs have played in the Patrick Mahomes, one of the top 3 worst games, I think, in the Patrick Mahomes era of the Chiefs. They haven't lost since then, 12 in a row. If they win on Sunday in Vegas, they'll match the franchise record winning streak at 13. So, is there any reason to believe that the somewhat flawed Chiefs team that we're seeing now, with the injuries, in addition to the wide receiver injuries now on the defensive side, not only with Jalen Watson, but we don't know about Mike Dana's status. So is there any reason to believe the Chiefs are in for a letdown on Sunday at Vegas? What would be a concern that the Chiefs have going into this game?
Well, I mean, I think the concern for the Chiefs is just what you mentioned, Blair. I mean, I think rightfully so. You see some power rankings out there, and some of them don't have the Chiefs number 1. And I get it. You know what I mean? I understand. I get that people can think that the Lions are better than the Chiefs. I don't really might not even dispute that, because there have been times this year when the Lions have been dominant. And you go to these press conferences like we're talking about, and Mahomes is kind of lamenting all the things he didn't do right, and that this team hasn't really hit its stride yet. So this is not the Chiefs team in the past where they would face a Raiders team like this and would be 14-point favorites or something crazy in the NFL. It's still the NFL. I mean, one thing is just, a turnover or two, and all of a sudden you're kind of an even game, and, things can happen on the cliche any given Sunday. I did see a stat also that the Raiders love to go cover 0 against Patrick Mahomes. And we know that nobody usually blitzes Mahomes. It usually doesn't work out, but those are boom or bust plays. And so Mahomes has got to be good in those scenarios. The Chiefs should be anticipating that. But when you bring cover 0, when you bring everybody and have no safety help, there can be really big plays. I actually remember that play in Vegas. It was Justin Watson who had a really big play not too long ago in Vegas that started off a blowout victory for the Chiefs there. But those are the ones. That's kind of what the Chiefs defense is doing well, by the way, on a side note, which is they're forcing teams to make these really difficult plays, and they're not making them. You know, I dropped that ball last week. If I catches that one, you know, who knows how that game goes, but the Chiefs have combined good defense with teams not taking advantage of the deep shots they have against them. I would say for the Chiefs in this particular game, you've got to figure Mahomes is going to get all out pressured a few times because that's what the Raiders do. Are you going to make the play? Or are you going to have a turnover in that particular play? They're going to try to mix things up, and mixing things up sometimes can have crazy results. The Chiefs can turn those into big plays. They can turn this toward a blowout rather than a close game, which is obviously what the Raiders would love to have.
Yeah, the Raiders last year, the team that exposed the Chiefs' inability to throw it deep, because for so long we had blamed the defenses for that. You know, playing two safeties deep is a really hard code to crack when you're trying to get the deep passing game working. And so for the longest time, we said that's the reason the Chiefs didn't have success throwing the ball deep. The Raiders dared the Chiefs to throw deep last year on Christmas Day, and they just couldn't do it. And that really, I think, set the wheels in motion for the Chiefs offseason of, you know, drafting Xavier Worthy, of, you know, adding Hollywood Brown to the mix during the offseason, which obviously they don't have him this year. But I agree with Jesse. I think there's the opportunity could be there for Xavier Worthy to have a big day. But I mean, look, the opportunity was there on the opening play of the third quarter as well. I mean, when you are an offense that is going to have to grind for more stuff than you have in the past, like your margin for error is thinner than it ever has been. You can't miss those shots, and they could have the opportunity to have one or two of those shots in Vegas.
Hey, and Vahe, isn't Mahomes in for a little bit better luck? And there's a, you know, look at his 2 interceptions last weekend. The first one is batted down at the line and actually caught by the player who batted it down, and the second one, I don't know if it would have been caught, but Worthy slipped and fell, and the ball was picked off. So, you know, it's a game that really crushed his passer rating and hurt his stats. But Mahomes, he's not going to get any sympathy from anybody else in football, but he's not catching many breaks. He's not getting a deflected pass caught. You know, he's not seeing a guy make maybe a great catch. A defender's not slipping after a completion to Justin Watson sort of thing. It seems like Mahomes is in for a little bit better luck than he's gotten this year.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, some of that he's kind of making some of his own bad luck to some degree, but sort of to your point and Sam's point, I mean, I think we look at that game totally differently, if not for the two kind of, I mean, the deflection's basically his fault, right? But it's a different way to get intercepted, and hard to blame him for, letting the ball go when Xavier Worthy was in position to make that before he fell. But as Sam referred to, if he hits that pass to Xavier Worthy, we're talking about a whole different complexion to that game. I thought, and I'd be interested to know if you guys agreed with me, it looked to me like Patrick really was making a concerted effort to stay in the pocket longer after bailing a lot more. And I think that had mixed reviews. I mean, he got sacked a couple times, and I think by late in the second half, he was more like in the darn it, I'm just going to go mode, or whatever the right word for that is. And I think also Blair, when you talk about the bad luck has also been losing all these guys. I mean, a number of his favorite targets. So we'll see. I would think that anybody watching the Chiefs and who understands kind of what the nitty gritty is about the Chiefs doesn't feel like, Patrick Mahomes is not the guy you want, right? I'd still say he's the guy you want. And it just has not shown up, I think, in the ways we're used to seeing it. I'd love to hear what the other guys think about that, though. I mean, I know he hasn't been the sharpest season either.
So what's so cool about Mahomes, I guess, is Sam's been all over this before, but like he's really good at the stuff we don't talk about. Like he's really good at avoiding sacks. He's really, really, really good at scrambling. And those two things have a huge impact on winning football games, and we just don't talk about them that much. So to your point, Vahe, like if you look at this last game and sort of what Mahomes is able to do, the scramble is one of the biggest plays of the game. I mean, Mahomes' scrambles, he's gone for what, 3 scrambles of 20 or more yards or something like that. And Chiefs have no runs, no running back run. We just talk about how they run the ball all the time. They have no running back runs over 13 yards this whole season. They had a 13-yard run this past game against the 49ers. So there are still some really good things that he does that we don't talk about probably enough. I mean, you look at some of these other quarterbacks around the league, their sack rates elevated. People blame the offensive line. Well, it's the quarterback. You know what I mean? The quarterback shares more blame than that. He's the one making the decisions and has, as you guys have talked about, the spatial awareness of kind of what's collapsing around him. So I still think Mahomes is playing a big part in their success. It's just, we're used to him being like a second-round fantasy football draft pick, and like right now he's borderline droppable. These stats, he's not putting them up. 6 touchdowns in 6 games. That's not something we're used to seeing from Patrick Mahomes, but it can still be effective. I think you hit on something kind of interesting, Vahe, which is we know the left tackle has kind of been an interesting project this year, but like you look at some of these advanced stats and not only in the run blocking, but in the pass blocking too, the Chiefs offensive line's played pretty well this year. And some of these next gen stats say that Mahomes is getting pressured less this year than he has in other years. So this is something that Mahomes knows and that he's going to have to figure out. So like you said, Vi, for him to take a step to maybe stay in the pocket more, trust it more, that's a good thing because right now, everybody does expect him to play at a higher level. He expects that as well, but I don't think the circumstances are potentially as bad pass blocking as what it seemed like with his happy feet in there, just because right now, left guard, center, right guard, and then even at times right tackle, that's been 4 spots that have really been locked down at certain times this year. So, I'm sure Mahomes is looking at this and trying to figure out how to get things going in the right direction, more so than they have been so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, the 2 plays, I mentioned those top 3 plays in terms of expected points added. The next 2 are the Mahomes scramble plays. As far as positive plays for the Chiefs, because it's a 4th down play that he bowls over the defender, and it's a 33-yard scramble. I actually did not think Patrick Mahomes played that poorly, even though the rating totally disagrees with me on that. I thought he was worse in Atlanta. I thought he was worse in the second half against Cincinnati. But to me, that speaks to the bigger picture here, which is the Chiefs are 6-0, and we've yet to see the A game from their best player.
That's a great point. No doubt about it. I don't know what his best game was probably the opener, right? Against the Ravens. I mean, statistically it is. At least one of the top 2 anyway, was in the Ravens game, and they needed it that night. So, speaking of the Ravens, watch them on Monday night against the Buccaneers, a team that after the Chiefs play in Las Vegas, the next game is against the Tampa Bay Bucks. They're down their top 2 wide receivers now. It just leads me to wonder when the best chance for the Chiefs' first loss. Do we have to go to Buffalo in about a month from now to determine that? Is there a bad vibe game between now and Buffalo?
I think there's a couple teams that are more difficult than what they seem on the schedule. Tampa's one of them. And then the Broncos are playing good defense.
Sure.
And we've seen teams that pressure up the middle give Patrick Mahomes some trouble at times. And so that's going to be a really interesting matchup for this interior line that Jesse mentioned, as far as they probably have the best 3-man interior in football. But Zach Allen's had a great year for Denver, and Denver covers really well. They probably would have Surtain back by then, I'm surmising. So I think that could be a sneaky tough matchup for him as well.
I'll just repeat what I said earlier, which is I just don't feel that this is the dominant team where every week you're going to look up and go, oh, they're 12-point favorites. Like this is just not this Chiefs team. Like we haven't seen their A game, but like we've seen their B and C game when it comes to the other aspects, and that's what it's going to take to win these games. And so they're not out of the woods to lose to one of these other teams. But to your point, Blair, yeah, I mean, at Buffalo, that'll be a game that probably around a 50-50 and probably the best opportunity for a loss. These other ones probably going to be 60 to 75% for the Chiefs to win, which means any given Sunday they could lose it as well if things aren't going their way.
And while we haven't seen their A game, we have seen them, I think we can say, become increasingly able to know how to put a game away. And it's not coincidence, right? Out of these 12 wins in a row and the 6-0 this season, 9 or 10 of them have been, things that came down to crunch time and to just whether it's guts or wits, they've got a knack for it.
Okay, we'll save the prospects of an undefeated season for another show then. Meanwhile, that'll wrap up another great conversation about the Chiefs with beat writer Jesse Newell and columnist Sam McDowell and Vahe Gregorian. Shout out to our producers, Randy Mason and Monty Davis. Hey, leave us a message or a comment and let us know what you thought of the show. And we'll be back soon on Sports Beat KC, where we talk sports in and around Kansas City.